When Anthony's wife forbade him from seeing their children after the divorce, he had no other choice but to disguise himself as an elderly woman and get a job as their nanny to spend time with them. In the courtroom, the divorce case between Anthony and Kate was being heard. They had 2 children, and Anthony suspected that the judge would decide the children would stay with Kate since she had a better job and owned a house. And so it happened, the judge said the children would live with Kate. Anthony's heart sank as he heard the judge's decision. He had feared this outcome, but hearing it confirmed made it all too real. After the court session ended, Anthony gathered his things slowly and walked out of the courtroom. He saw Kate standing outside the courthouse, talking to someone on the phone. Her expression was serious, and she gestured with her free hand as she spoke. Anthony hesitated, feeling a lump in his throat, but he knew he had to talk to her. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to her. "Kate," he said softly. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and she lowered her phone and covered the mouthpiece. "Well, I guess that's it," Anthony said, referring to the divorce. "I'm not really comfortable talking right now." "Did you want to discuss something specific?" Kate replied. No, sorry." Anthony started to leave, but then he remembered something important. He turned back to her. "Actually, yes. When can I take the kids?" Kate sighed and held her phone to her ear briefly, saying she would call back later. She rubbed her temples as she turned to Anthony. "I'm only comfortable with you coming on weekends when I'm home." "But that's too little," Anthony protested. "I can pick them up from school or take them to their activities. I want to be part of their daily lives." Kate shook her head. "Anthony, I don't want to leave you alone with the kids. You're too irresponsible. I can't be sure they'll be safe with you." "But I'm their father," Anthony said, his frustration growing. "You couldn't even build them the playhouse they've been dreaming of," Kate retorted. "How many years have you been promising it? 2, 3? You know I've had problems at work," Anthony began, but Kate cut him off. "I don't have time for this conversation anymore," she said, her tone final. Anthony sighed heavily and turned to leave. As he walked away, Kate called after him. "One more thing," she said. Anthony turned to look at her. "I'm planning to get full custody of the kids." Anthony felt a wave of panic. He wanted to say something else, but Kate was already talking on the phone again. He heard her say, "Yes, I need to find a nanny for them. But it's so hard to find someone good nowadays." Hearing this, Anthony had an idea about how he could spend more time with his children. He remembered a movie he watched as a child, in which a man dressed up as a nanny. Anthony was very unsure about how reliable this plan was, but he didn't have any other options. Anthony decided to disguise himself as a woman so Kate would hire him as a nanny. This way, he could prove he was responsible and spend more time with his children. Anthony asked his friend from the theater to lend him some women's clothing, a wig, and makeup to look like an older woman. His friend, a skilled makeup artist, helped him put together the perfect disguise. They spent hours choosing the right dress, shoes, and accessories. Finally, Anthony looked in the mirror and saw a completely different person, Mrs. Grimsley. The next day, Anthony went to the interview with Kate. He wore a long floral dress, sensible shoes, and a grey wig. He had even used makeup to give himself wrinkles. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. When he arrived at Kate's house, he took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Kate opened it, looking slightly stressed. "Hello, you must be Mrs. Grimsley," she said, giving him a polite smile. "Yes, dear, that's me," Anthony replied in a high-pitched, wobbly voice. "Come in, please," Kate said. They walked into the living room, where Kate gestured for him to sit down. Anthony settled into an armchair, feeling the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "So, Mrs. Grimsley, can you tell me a bit about yourself?" Kate asked. "Of course, dear," Anthony began, trying to sound convincing. "I've been a nanny for over 30 years. I've looked after children of all ages. I believe in good manners, healthy eating, and lots of outdoor play." Kate nodded. "That sounds wonderful. What are your thoughts on discipline?" "I believe in gentle but firm discipline," Anthony replied. "Children need boundaries, but they also need to feel loved and understood." Kate smiled, looking relieved. "I agree. My children can be a handful sometimes, but they are good kids." "I'm sure they are," Anthony said, feeling a pang of guilt for deceiving her. After a few more questions, Kate stood up. "Well, Mrs. Grimsley, I think you'll be a good fit for our family." "When can you start?" Anthony's heart leaped with joy. "I can start right away if you need me to." "That's perfect," Kate said, extending her hand. "Welcome to our home, Mrs. Grimsley." Anthony shook her hand, feeling a mixture of relief and excitement. "Thank you, dear. I'm looking forward to it." Anthony felt a surge of hope. This was his chance to show Kate he could be responsible and take good care of their children. He was determined to make the most of this opportunity, even if it meant living a double life as Mrs. Grimsley. On his first day of work, Anthony, disguised as Mrs. Grimsley, felt nervous. He stood in the kitchen, trying to make breakfast for Miley and Thomas. His hands shook as he fumbled with the frying pan. He had never been very good at cooking, and it showed. He managed to burn the toast and spill milk on the counter. Miley and Thomas watched him with curious eyes. "Mrs. Grimsley, do you need some help?" Miley asked. Anthony forced a smile. "Oh, my dear, I think I do. Breakfast isn't my strong suit today." Thomas giggled. "Mom always makes us eggs and toast. Do you know how to do that?" Anthony nodded. Yes, of course. Let's try that." With the children's help, breakfast turned out much better. They guided Anthony, and he managed to make decent scrambled eggs and toast. Miley and Thomas seemed to enjoy helping and felt proud of their teamwork. When it was time to pack lunch, Anthony was still a bit clumsy. He decided to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches but added cheese as he always did since the kids were little. After a few days, Anthony got used to his role as Mrs. Grimsley. He learned what the children needed for school and got better at making breakfast and lunch. He even started helping Kate with household chores, like vacuuming and doing laundry. The children enjoyed playing with Anthony, even though they sometimes teased him. "Mrs. Grimsley, you dance funny," Thomas said, laughing as they danced in the living room. Anthony twirled around, making funny faces. "Well, funny dancing is the best kind of dancing." Miley and Thomas laughed, feeling happy and comfortable around Mrs. Grimsley. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Anthony decided to tidy up the house. He wanted to make sure everything looked perfect. Kate came home from work, looking exhausted. Anthony was in the kitchen, warming up dinner for her. Kate walked in, her shoulders slumped. "I don't remember this house ever being so clean and smelling so good," Kate said. Anthony smiled. "I'm happy to help you, dear. The children are already asleep." Kate leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. "Where were you during my marriage? she joked, though her eyes showed sadness. Anthony's heart ached, but he kept his voice steady. "Didn't your husband help you?" "No," Kate sighed, shaking her head. "He spent all his time at work. I'm not even sure he knows how old our children are." Anthony felt a pang of guilt. He realized she was right. He had been so focused on work that he missed out on his family. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said softly. Kate looked away, her eyes glistening. After the divorce, he wanted to spend more time with the kids. "Can you believe it?" Anthony swallowed hard. "Why not give him a chance?" he asked. "He's too irresponsible," Kate replied. "Although, if you look at his work, you wouldn't say so. But in everyday life, it's different. I'm afraid to leave him alone with the kids. I'm not sure he can take good care of them." Anthony nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I see," he said. Kate forced a small smile. "Maybe he'd be a better father if you gave him some parenting lessons," she joked. Anthony, still in the guise of Mrs. Grimsley, replied, "I'd be happy to help." The second court session was approaching, and Anthony wanted to tell Kate the truth, that he was the nanny and that he had proven he could handle his responsibilities and the children well. One evening, Kate and Anthony, disguised as Mrs. Grimsley, were sitting in the kitchen while the children slept. There was a storm outside, and Kate had offered Mrs. Grimsley to stay with them until the storm passed. "Can I ask you something?" Kate asked. "Of course," Anthony replied. "I want to take full custody of the children from my ex," Kate said. "I thought it would be better for everyone. But now I'm doubting it. He spends all weekends with the kids, and now I just don't know. What should I do? I'm not sure I can help you. It has to be your decision," Anthony said. "Yes, but I'm just confused," Kate admitted. Anthony took a deep breath. "Then maybe give him another chance?" he suggested. "Do you think so? I'm afraid he'll let me down again," Kate said. Anthony felt a surge of determination. It was time to confess. "Kate, he began, but a loud thunderclap interrupted him. The children's cries echoed down the hallway. They had woken up from the thunder. Kate started to get up, but Anthony stopped her. "I'll go to them. You rest," Anthony said. "Thank you, Mrs. Grimsley," Kate replied, sinking back into her chair. Anthony went up to the children's room. Miley and Thomas were huddled together, looking scared. He sat on the edge of the bed and began telling them fictional stories about sailors bravely enduring storms and thunder at sea. The children calmed down, their eyes heavy with sleep. "You always know what to say," Thomas said before drifting off. Anthony watched the children for a few more minutes, making sure they were asleep. Anthony was in his apartment, changing into Mrs. Grimsley to go see the children. He was almost ready when there was a knock at the door. Surprised, Anthony looked through the peephole and saw Kate standing there. His heart raced. Quickly, he took off his Mrs. Grimsley disguise and put on his regular clothes. He opened the door and let Kate in. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," Kate said. No, Anthony replied. "Where are the kids?" "They're playing with the neighbors. Mrs. Grimsley is supposed to pick them up later," Kate explained. "Mrs. Grimsley?" Anthony repeated. "Yes, their nanny. Didn't I tell you?" Kate said, raising an eyebrow. Anthony shook his head. "It doesn't matter, I wanted to talk to you. Yes, of course," Anthony said. "About the custody of the children," Kate started but then stopped, looking over Anthony's shoulder. "What's that over there?" Anthony turned and saw the wig he wore as Mrs. Grimsley, which he had forgotten to hide. Panic surged through him. That. Kate walked over to the table where the wig was and opened the drawers. She found the makeup and stared at them in shock. "Oh, my God." "Kate, I can explain everything," Anthony said, desperation in his voice. "What can you explain? How you deceived me? Deceived your children?" Kate yelled. "I just wanted to spend more time with the kids," Anthony pleaded. "I can't believe this. It was because of Mrs. Grimsley that I decided not to take full custody. And now I find out that you were just tricking me all along and that this was always your plan," Kate shouted. "You changed your mind about taking full custody?" Anthony asked, hope flickering inside him. "Not after what I just saw," Kate snapped. "Kate, please, I did it only for the children. I didn't want to manipulate you. Stay away from me and the kids," Kate said, her voice cold. "Kate, please, don't do this," Anthony begged, his eyes filling with tears. "I was offered a job in another state, and I hesitated. Because of you, because of the kids. But now I'm definitely accepting it," Kate said, her face set in determination. "No, Kate," Anthony reached out, but Kate stepped back. "I don't want my children to have someone in their life who constantly lies and for whom it's normal," Kate said as she walked out of the apartment, slamming the door loudly behind her. "Our children," Anthony said to the empty room. Today was Miley's birthday, and Anthony had prepared a special gift for her. Weeks ago, before Kate found out everything, Miley had invited Mrs. Grimsley to her birthday party. Determined to keep his promise, Anthony dressed up as Mrs. Grimsley and went to the party at Kate's house. Anthony arrived at the house and knocked on the door. Kate opened it, her expression turning from surprise to frustration. "Anthony, what are you doing here?" she asked. "Miley invited Mrs. Grimsley to her birthday weeks ago." "I could not come," Anthony replied. "I told you to stay away from us," Kate said. "If I can't be at my daughter's birthday as her father, at least let me be there as her nanny," Anthony pleaded. "Mrs. Grimsley is no longer their nanny," Kate stated, trying to close the door. "Please, Kate, let's not ruin our daughter's day," Anthony begged. "Groom hides a secret from his bride, but karma gets the job done. I found out my husband tells everyone I'm his kid's nanny. He doesn't fire out of pity. I took full revenge." Soon after, bus driver finds in his new apartment photo of woman he once kicked off the bus into the cold. Just then, Thomas and Miley ran up to the door. "Mrs. Grimsley," they shouted in unison. "You came," Miley said excitedly. "Of course, I couldn't miss the party of such a princess," Anthony said in Mrs. Grimsley's voice, making Miley laugh. "I have a surprise for you," Anthony continued, still in character. A truck pulled up to the house, and workers began unloading a large object covered with a sheet. "Take it to the backyard," Anthony instructed the workers. The workers carried Anthony's gift to the backyard. Kate watched in surprise as the children ran joyfully to see what it was. Miley eagerly removed the sheet, revealing a wooden playhouse that Anthony had promised the kids for so long. "Where did you get it?" Kate asked. "I made it," Anthony replied. Kate sighed, then nodded. "All right, you can stay, but only as Mrs. Grimsley." Anthony smiled, grateful for the chance. Kate walked over to the children, who were already climbing into the playhouse. A few days later, in court, Kate was awarded full custody of the children. Anthony was very upset about it. His heart felt heavy as he left the courthouse. Thomas and Miley ran up to him, their faces wet with tears. They hugged him tightly. "Please, Dad, don't leave us," Thomas said. "I'll visit you," Anthony replied, trying to keep his own tears from falling. "But we had so much fun when you were Mrs. Grimsley," Miley said. Anthony was surprised. "What? You knew?" "Of course," Thomas said. "Only our dad could be so clumsy with housework. And only you put cheese in peanut butter and jelly sandwiches," Miley added, giggling a little through her tears. Anthony laughed sadly. "Maybe I won't be your nanny anymore, but I'll always be your father." Kate approached them slowly. The kids were really better off with Mrs. Grimsley, she admitted, "and so was I. You can see the children whenever you want." Anthony looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "What about your job?" "I declined," Kate said. "I decided to give you one last chance. But no more schemes and deceptions." Anthony felt a wave of relief and joy. He reached out and hugged Kate tightly. After a few seconds, Kate hugged him back. "I promise," Anthony said. "No more tricks. Just being there for our kids. Tell us what you think about this story, and share it with your friends. It might inspire them and brighten their day. If you enjoyed this story, read this one. Twins Alan and Patrick were adopted by a single mother of 3 as babies. But on their 18th birthday, their birth mother showed up at the party and shocked everyone. Read the full story here. This piece is inspired by stories from the everyday lives of our readers and written by a professional writer. Any resemblance to actual names or locations is purely coincidental. All images are for illustration purposes only. Share your story with us, maybe it will change someone's life. If you would like to share your story, please send it to info@amamama.com.